We made the decision to turn around, get out of there, to get back. This is just awful. And as we swam back under Prebends Bridge, that's where Trevor spotted a trowel. It was actually quite a special trowel. It was silver, had a silver blade with an ivory handle, and it was inscribed with something quite special. It was 1500, 1600 years ago, Roman legions marching along this spot here, approaching the bridge. There's a big Roman fort just at the other side, Corbridge Roman fort, but 2 miles north of that is Hadrian's Wall. So you can just imagine this, tens of thousands of Roman soldiers, legionnaires from all over Europe would have crossed the bridge at this spot. And in the last 15 minutes of filming for the entire season, out pops this lovely little object, which was 16th century. And I can't tell you what it is when you see it.
That's not fair. You've just teased us. Hi, Gary. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Hi, cool. Gary. I'm Craig. How are you?
I'm very well, Craig.
Good to meet you.
I've been really excited about speaking to you. I know Craig has as well, because on our YouTube channel, we sort of have started trying to do a bit of, well, we tried to do a bit of archaeology, but it ended up being a river clean because there's so much junk.
I saw that. Well done. I think the UK needs more river cleaners.
Well, we were just talking about it, actually. I think the problem is, if we take too much rubbish out, the council potentially could charge us for it.
Disposal of it, yeah. We it's a long story, but I was once asked by the Environment Agency to do an underwater survey of the River Wear in Durham City, to calculate or to work out how many shopping trolleys were in there. And at that time, there was a supermarket just 100 meters or so away, and that's where they came from. And they could bill the supermarket £80 for every shopping trolley that they found. And there was 97 in total.
No.
And the reason they didn't go ahead with it is they had nowhere to put them all. Well, they did. They would have to go to a landfill because you couldn't use them again. But the logistics of getting them out, pulling them all out, there'd be mess everywhere on the riverside. They just said, "Oh, just leave them in there." And they've actually, today, they form a mini island, and they collect silt. So the silt's just a big mound. Plants and wildlife live there now. So it's
like a man-made reef then.
It is, yes. Like a sunken
I've got to say, to Waitrose's credit, who were the local supermarkets of the river Jim and I were in, to their credit, these were in a very poor state. They did do exactly what they said and came down and picked them all up, didn't they, Jim?
Yeah, same day. Picked them up. I mean, we pulled them out Sunday morning. And by the middle of Sunday afternoon, they were gone.
So you guys are based down Norfolk way?
Yeah.
I was down there doing a bit of research, maybe about, I would say 5 years ago now. Went into Norfolk, Norwich Castle, in the big castle there. Guy called, I think it was called Tim Allen, who might be the curator there. Really lovely guy. They had a collection of lead cloth seals, which I did my thesis on. And so I had a look at theirs, and he was quite impressed the fact that I knew exactly what these were, and I could date them. And we talked about me writing them up one day, and he would get the funding, and I would do the research and get the work published. And I think they had the largest collection outside of London at that time. I've surpassed that now, but it was so at one stage. In fact. In my thesis, I've got a page dedicated to the cloth sales from Norwich.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
The 17th century worsted cloth trade. The most prolifically manufactured cloth in England during the 17th century was Norfolk worsteds.
Today, we've got Gary Bankhead. So we know Gary as underwater archaeologist and river hunter. But maybe you'd like to expand on that a little bit, Gary.
No, I think you've got it. That's bottom line. That's who I am. No, and I am. Yes, thanks, gents. First of all, for inviting me onto the show. It's an honour. Any opportunity I get to spread the good word of the work I'm trying to do at Durham is wonderful. So thank you for that. Really, really long story, but the basic point really is the fact I'm based here in Durham City. Well, stunning World Heritage site. I sort of live, work, and play It's my backyard, I like to call it, Durham Castle and the Cathedral, and obviously the River Wear. So I'm based up in the northeast of England in County Durham, predominantly in Durham City, and I've been a subaquid diver for, we're looking at 27 years. So I joined a British subaquid club, Fell Divers, that's what we were called at that time. And that's no longer there now. The swim pool's been knocked down and the club was sort of disbanded and moved on. But that's where I sort of learned the basics of diving, managed to get all the way up to BSAC, qualified as a dive leader. And to be honest, I could have easily gone on and on and on, but I was very happy doing what I was doing at that time, and I didn't progress it. And I think with the benefit of hindsight, I wished I'd gone on to become sort of an advanced diver.
But dive leader is the equivalent of dive master, isn't it, with PADI? So it's in PADI, that's a professional qualification. So, and it's not easy to get to that level.
That's right.
When you started your scuba adventure, was that predominantly diving in the UK, or did you get to travel with your diving very much?
We've been based in the northeast of England. We're very fortunate in that we've got a sort of a diverse range of different diving opportunities not too far away. Right in our backyard is the River Tyne. And we did so much diving just off the shipwrecks off the Tyne. But if we travelled an hour up the coast to the Northumberland, we were in the Farne Islands territory.
Yeah.
Farne Islands, yeah.
Lovely.
I dived that so many, literally hundreds of times. And then just go beyond that and you were into St. Abbs. Nature and a marine reserve, which was clearly, it's a stunning, pristine site. You know, there's no rivers pollute in that area. And that's just a wonderful place to be, just less than 2 hours drive from my home. And then you would go across, you would travel down to Stony Cove and Leicester to do your training during the winter months, or even any lake, any swamp we could get in. We would anywhere, yeah. We ended up with this wonderful rib, and that opened up so many doors to us. And from that, we would go up to Oban, particularly during the later summer months where it was still warm up there. We were predominantly shipwreck divers. Any shipwreck we would get up there, and I just had some great fun doing that. I'm just trying to think of the name of the wreck that stands upright up in the Sound of Mull.
Yeah, I only read it not 2 or 3 weeks ago, and the name won't come back in my head. I read and I thought that was fascinating how this thing is, even with the motion of the waves, it's still standing upright on its nose with the bow.
It is, and I think the rock that it ran aground on is in Gaelic. That means big red rock or something like that. And you wonder how it missed it, how it hit the rock in the first place. It was the week that we'd done the expedition. As we came back in to go into the Sound of Mull, we've come back into Oban, where we'd set off from. And me and my buddy, good friend of mine, I'll call him Ray, because that's his name. Won't go into any other details. But that particular wreck, the bow of the ship sits at 50 meters, and as any diver would, you know, to bag a 50-meter dive was this great thing. And me and Ray were the first two down, and I think there's 12 of us dropping down in buddy pairs down, and you swim through the wreck, and it is pretty stunning, crystal clear water and everything. And we got right down to the bottom. And I spotted a little sort of shallow area, and I was at 49 meters, and I thought, you know, I've got to log 50 on my computer. So I put my wrist down into the little shallow depression on the seabed, and I looked at my watch on my computer, and it was 50 meters. I thought, yes, done it 50 meters. And then that was it, straight back up and enjoy the rest of the dive, because personally, I hated being that deep. It was scary. So I turned around to Ray to give him the signal to, right, let's go back up. And he wasn't there. He was gone. He disappeared. And I was like, oh my God, where is Ray? So I'm looking back up the wreck, and you can see right away at the surface, you can see the board that we dropped off, and I'd see the other divers coming down in the pairs. And I was like, oh my God, where's he at? And I sort of scanned around, and I didn't want to go off searching for him at that depth. I mean, my computer was already screaming, get out of there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he wasn't there. I was like, oh my God, it was just this horrific feeling, sinking feeling, as you can imagine. And I sort of ventured forward a little bit, and the visibility perhaps was about 15 meters there, but it literally wasn't there. So I had no option but to sort of leave the seabed and head back up the ship towards the surface. And as I must have got up to about, say, 30 meters, and I encountered the next two divers coming down. So in sign language, we sort of asked the question, where's Ray? Where's me buddy? And just the look of terror in their eyes, because they hadn't seen him. He hadn't gone back up. And it was just this horrible experience. And as I sort of surfaced, I was passing other divers and I was saying, look out for Ray, he's gone. And so there was this big team effort to sort of look anywhere they could. So I got back up to the, I think the sort of, it's not a propeller, but maybe it's a propeller, the rudder is at 6 meters. So I was doing a deco stop there and I'm looking down and see everybody below us, and Ray wasn't there. He wasn't on the surface. And once my deco cleared, I got to the surface and got on the boat, and he wasn't there. And I was saying to the skipper, have you seen Ray? Where is Ray? And nobody could see him. And one by one, the other divers came up. 2 by 2, the other divers came up, and we were all looking there, and we were scanning, and we literally had the radio in our hands to call it in and say, we've got a missing diver here. And it must be about half a mile away. There's a smaller island with seals on. And somebody goes, there he is, he's with the seals. I said, no, it can't be, they're seals. So we got the binoculars out, and sure enough, it was Ray. So we paddled off to him, and it's like, Ray, what the hell? What happened? Where did you go? And he says, Gary, he says, I nearly died. I'm so sorry. And he'd spotted a scallop, and he just swam off just to get this single scallop from the seabed. And as he did, he must have just gone out into the current, and it really picked him up, and he couldn't get back. And he said, I grabbed a hold of some kelp, and it just, it might have been kelp, quite deep kelp, and it just snapped. And he says, I couldn't get back to you, and I could see you, but I couldn't. I was like just getting whisked away so much, and the current took him half a mile down the sound.
Scary experience for him.
Yeah, absolutely. But
to be honest, I mean, we had it a couple of months ago or a few months ago. It wasn't obviously as bad as that, but when you do have a missing diver or a potentially missing diver, it's the most awful feeling in the world.
Isn't it? Yes.
Was the diving that you got into, did you do it just for pleasure or was it for work?
Purely pleasure. It's probably worth pointing out that at that time I'd recently joined the Fire and Rescue Service. So I was a firefighter in County Durham and Darlington Fire and Rescue Service, and so I joined that in '89. So and a couple of the firefighters actually started to go diving at the same time as I did. And I think wearing the breathing apparatus for the job that we did, for our day job, meant being underwater wasn't a big thing. It was very easy to get to grips with, and so we're very comfortable doing it. It's the Rhonda. The Rhonda is the wreck.
That's right, the Rhonda. Yeah,
the Rhonda, wreck of the Rhonda.
What we've got to go and do, Jim?
Yeah, well, I've never heard of it, so I'll have to have a look at that and add it to the list.
It's not too far away from the Hispania, which is just a couple of miles away. It's an upright wreck. So, did
the archaeology come much before Scuba, or did Scuba come first?
Scuba came first. A long time before the archaeology came. If anything, I was a time team archaeologist. So I would watch Time Team like we all did, and thoroughly enjoyed it. Really interested in, but didn't really have a clue. We have this big wall up here called Hadrian's Wall. So, the Romans are here and there and everywhere, and so you're always interested in, but really, unless you apply yourself and read the books, then you're never going to really understand it. You can only specialize in so many things, can't you? And so archaeology was something I was aware of. A couple of my colleagues would go out metal detecting, and occasionally they'll go, look at this coin, it's a Roman coin, and a denarius, look at this. And that was fascinating, but I never even had a metal detector. It wasn't anything that I was interested in. Sorry, I was interested in, but nothing I could pursue. And there was a wreck, Eugenia Chandris. It's exactly 1 mile offshore. So it's a massive wreck site. It's over the equivalent of 3 or 4 football pitches. It's everywhere. And it's a really popular dive site because it's only 12 meters deep. On one particular dive there, we came out in our rib and we were over the wreck, and we dropped down in our buddy pairs. Came across this diver. He wasn't in our party. He was another diver. He was just, his backside was sticking up in the air and his head was buried in a hole. And he'd been digging this hole on the wreck. And he, to his right-hand side, he had this pile of two-pound anti-aircraft shells that had been just literally digging out of the seabed. And I was like, oh my God, that's how you find things on this wreck. You have to dig for them. And honestly, he had about 40 or 50. They didn't have the sort of the round end. There were blanks. Yeah, there was no ammunition, but he was having great fun getting it. And I just learned from that moment. I said, yeah, you can't just, if you're going to find something on a wreck, dig it out. So it was that one little thing where I discovered you have to dig for things, and I always remembered that. And on subsequent dives, I did a couple of digs just with your hand, and did find a couple of objects. Later on, I did find some of them £2 anti-aircraft shells as well. So,
how did you get into proper archaeology then? Because obviously you're a firefighter, you're diving as a hobby, one of the few, if not the only, underwater archaeologist. How did you get into? Did you suddenly just say, "Well, I'm going to start looking for historical artifacts now in a river"?
A little bit like that. It was April 2007, and I was having a cup of coffee with my wife Angela. We were in the Squire's coffee shop, which is just off Framwellgate Bridge in Durham City, and we're having a chat. And Angela inquired when we were going to go diving next. But she meant the North Sea, the Farne Islands. But it was way too early in the season to go out in the sea. That, we're still getting the storms. Now, Rib hadn't even been serviced, so it was some time off. And she literally said, well, why don't you go diving in the river? And she pointed down to the river weir, which was literally just below us. We were sitting on a balcony. You're sure to find something old, she said. So that was the seed. So the seed was planted. I dismissed the idea there and then. River was the same colour as the coffee we were drinking. But a couple of weeks later, conditions improved, and at that time, my brother Trevor was diving with us as well. Trevor was a sergeant in the Royal Horse Artillery, and whenever he was home on leave, he would tag along. We would do some dives, and we had a conversation about diving in Durham, and we picked a spot. We were going to go for a bridge called Prebend's Bridge, which is quite scenic. It's an late 18th century bridge. And not as old as Durham's other two bridges, but nevertheless a nice area to dive. So we made a decision. I think it was about 2 weeks later, and we got an opportunity. It was early on a Saturday morning, and we went down. We didn't have permission to dive in the river at that moment in time, but the river there is less than 2 meters deep.
Yeah.
And if you entered at the edges, kept low down, you were pretty safe from that.
Under the cover of darkness then, so no one could see you? Or
Well, it was early on a Saturday morning.
Not so many people around.
Not so many people, yeah. And we were just going for a bit of adventure, really, going having a look. And we got in. I remember the water being bitterly cold. It was awful. You had sort of ice cream forehead. It was so cold. You know what I mean? We did that dive, and we used the word grim to describe it. It was just awful. We never saw an eel, let alone a salmon or a trout, and it was just bleak. But this wasn't too bad, to be honest. It wasn't too bad. Maybe about 2.5 meters. So you'd scan the riverbed, and there was a couple of deep gullies which seemed interesting, but typically it was 2 meters deep. And we got halfway around towards Elvet Bridge, which was our destination. We made the decision to turn around and get out of there to get back. This is just awful. And as we swam back under Prebend's Bridge, that's where Trevor spotted a trowel. We said later that he needed a trowel to do some pointing on some brickwork back home. So he thought, oh, I'll have that. So he picked up this trowel, and when we got out and had a look at it, it was actually quite a special trowel. It was silver, had a silver blade with an ivory handle, and it was inscribed with something quite special. It was a foundation stone of St. Michael's Church, Durgapur, was laid by His Grace the Lord Archbishop of Canterbury on a site provided to the diocese by the Bengal Coal Company Limited. And it was just this incredible silver trowel. But Lord Archbishop of Canterbury, that in itself is like, what? How? So it was just that chance discovery. In my mind, I was never going to go back in that river ever again because of the conditions it was so bad.
And now you're in it all the time.
Yeah. So we got home, and I think Google was a new thing at that time, and we very quickly identified that Bishop Ramsay himself, the the Lord Archbishop of Canterbury was Arthur Michael Ramsay, who happened to be the 100th Archbishop of Canterbury. So he's a man who had this long association with Durham. Way back in 1942, he was a canon at Durham Cathedral. He married his wife Joan that same year. He later became Bishop of Durham. Then he got promoted again and went to become Archbishop of York. And if you recall Queen Elizabeth's coronation, that, you know, the grainy black and white footage, he's one of the two bishops actually escorting the young Elizabeth during the coronation. He then became Archbishop of Canterbury. I think he held that post for maybe either 10 or 12 years. But importantly, when he retired, he came back to Durham, to a city he loved. And he spent his later years, it wasn't his last years, but his, I think it was 3 or 4 of his last 5 years living in Durham. And he ended up living in a house on the South Bailey, just 200 metres away from Prebends Bridge. So a theory formed in my mind that if that trowel is in the river, it's because the house was burgled. And if there's one object, surely there was more. So the next day, we went back to that spot, and we were pootling about in the riverbed, pretty much where Trevor found the trowel. And within just a few minutes, I found this wonderful bronze Corpus Christi. It was quite a special one. It was down its side, had the maker's mark. It was a gentleman called Jean Lambert-Rookie, a Polish man who moved to Paris just before the start of the Great War. He ended up fighting with the French army, survived the Great War, and during the 1920s and 30s became this very famous Art Deco sculptor. And even to this day in Paris, there's a museum dedicated to his work. And here he is, one of his pieces actually in the river. So that was like, wow. A few minutes later, I found this large bronze baptizing spoon as well. At the time, we didn't know what it was, but I thought it was a Victorian kitchen jelly mold. You know, it was just like really unusual.
Yeah, but that would be an awesome thing to find, wouldn't it?
It would. It truly would be. So given the proximity to Durham Cathedral, we are talking 300 metres away. Surely that stretch of the river where we were belonged to the cathedral. And because I was a watch manager in the fire and rescue service, Trevor was a sergeant in the Royal Horse Artillery, we were, you know, respectable members of the community. We had to do the right thing. And we had an opportunity a couple of weeks later to meet up again, and we went to the cathedral and quite naively knocked on a couple of doors, ended up speaking to the land agent who dealt with such things. And you can just imagine how skeptical they were.
Yeah.
So much so that we had to get our ID badges out and prove who we were. And just try to explain, look, we've accidentally stumbled upon these objects and we didn't know you weren't allowed to be in the river. There was no signs. We knew you couldn't fish. There was loads of signs saying that, but there was no sign saying no diving.
No.
So we had eventually, I guess they believed our story, and we were given a license agreement. We were asked to go back to Prebends Bridge and undertake a full survey of the riverbed with a view to finding other objects that
On
may
their
be.
behalf.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
So, but importantly, just like the Treasure Act, the value of anything we found would be split between the finders and the landowners, and Durham Cathedral were the landowners, and they wanted possession of anything that we did find. So that was incredible. Wow, you know, this is a proper treasure hunt now. Being sanctioned by Durham Cathedral, and so that's what we did. So for 2 years, Trevor and I went back to that spot. Slowly but surely, we started to uncover this quite an incredible assemblage of gold and silver objects, and that spanned Bishop Ramsay's tenure. Not just, as Archbishop of York and Canterbury. So it seems that where Bishop Ramsay travelled extensively around the world, it was sort of at the height of the Jet Age, so he was perhaps the most travelled archbishop of his time. And wherever he went, there was a pattern emerged. So he would travel under invitation. When he was there, he would go on this grand tour. He would always end up giving a talk, usually in front of a large ecclesiastical audience. And in some recognition of the good work, the wonderful work that the bishop had done, he'd be given sort of maybe an honorary degree or a doctorate in theology or humanities, some recognition. And he'd also be given a memento, a gift to remember that visit. So he amassed this huge collection of objects. And when he ended up being back in Durham, He brought them with him. There's a lot of speculation about why they ended up in the river. I know exactly how they ended up in the river, but there's a book out there. It's available on the internet, and it's called the Oxford Handbook of the European Bronze Age. So it's a series of books. This particular one has a chapter in it written by Professor Richard Bradley from the University of Reading, and it's specifically about two divers in Durham who found this collection of gold and silver treasure belonging to a former Archbishop of Canterbury. So he doesn't mention Trevor and me by name, but clearly this is what he's talking about. And Professor Bradley puts forward two schools of thought. He dismisses the burglary theory, but he suggests that either Bishop Ramsay deliberately threw these objects into the river himself to take them out of circulation, so to protect their special character, I guess. Perhaps, and this is the link to our Bronze Age ancestors. He deliberately threw the objects into the river as a gift to God. So this deliberate disposition, as recently as sort of 1980, 1982, because that's the sort of time period it would have happened, is something that our Bronze Age ancestors would have been doing. And you would have all heard of similar votive offerings, whether it's a helmet, a shield, or a sword, being found in a watery context up and down the length and breadth of the UK, really.
Yeah. So all of this sparked by finding a single trowel. For that 2-year period, that surely must have sparked a lot of people noticing what you were doing, even other divers. How did you protect the area? How did you keep it quiet? Or did you?
Yeah, no, we were, I wouldn't say we were sworn to secrecy, but we were very conscious. We didn't want news to get out of the discovery because we didn't want other divers going on a treasure hunt. It was cathedral land, so you had to have permission to do it, which we did. So we pretty much would go in early in the morning. We'd go in whenever conditions were good, to be honest. We had vehicular access up to the river's water edge, which made it much easier. We worked very closely with the resident archaeologist for Durham Cathedral, a gentleman called Norman Emery. And Norman, he was probably one of my first inspirations into getting into the world of archaeology, because he was really methodical in how he recorded everything. And from day one, everything that we found, and these objects that may not have been associated with Bishop Ramsay, but Norman recorded them. Norman didn't do IT or digital. He wrote everything down, but he kept a record. So we had this chronology of every object that we found. We had it sort of GPS, the date it was found, the approximate depth, the type of material, and that in itself was really important. So I had multiple meetings with Norman, really started to understand how he would do that as an archaeologist, and then I was starting to develop an interest in some of the objects that we were finding. We didn't find anything real aged, maybe 18th, 17th or 18th century, but I was starting to research and read books, and I was really getting into it, these small finds.
So you were still a firefighter at this point while you're doing all, and the 2 years of finding stuff, you're still employed as a firefighter?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think because we worked a shift system, I was able to get, quite a lot of time off. You work a couple of night shifts and you're off during the day, so go diving. That was my plan. And on one particular dive, I found a small coin. It was about the size of slightly bigger than a modern 2-pence piece, but much more thicker. And it was a Dutch East India Company, one Doit, D-O-I-T, one Doit. In itself, it's not a really interesting coin. It tells us a little bit about trade, which is interesting. But for me, what was really important is the date of the coin, because it was dated 1783, and that was 1793. And that was just a few years after Prebends Bridge had actually been built. So if I was finding objects as old as Prebends Bridge, what might I find at Durham's other two bridges, Elvet or Framwellgate, which were 12th century bridges? So I started to do a lot of research about the other bridges with a view to going to search at them spots there. What we hadn't realised is that Durham Cathedral actually didn't own the land, but didn't own the river near those two bridges. Because we weren't just working with Norman Emery to record the objects. Anything that was old, over 300 years old, we were reporting to the Portable Antiquity Scheme as well. So we worked very closely with a lady called Frances McIntosh, who was the Finds Liaison Officer at that time. She sort of how she started to record finds was fascinating, and she taught me how to actually record finds myself on the Portable Antiquity Scheme, and I was starting to do that. And so we identified who the landowner was for the stretch of the river at Elvet, because when you find objects in the river, it's the same law applies as if it was on land. Somebody almost certainly owns that stretch of the river. They might just have the fishing rights on it, or they may just own the section up to the midpoint, and somebody on the other side of the river owns that. And there's areas where nobody owns them. But if you don't know who that landowner is and you haven't got those permissions, you're breaking the law by going there and taking objects off. And that's, I can't emphasize enough. If anybody is inspired by what I've done or what they've seen on the River Hunters team do, you really, really got to have those permissions in place first. And then you've got to throw into the mix the fact that both of Durham's old bridges are scheduled ancient monuments. So you're not allowed to use a metal detector within 200 meters of them to start. And you certainly can't touch them. You can't dig underneath them. And there's a whole raft of different restrictions against you there. So you've got to search away from them. So basically, you've got to have those permissions in place before you do this. Everything you find, you must declare and work closely with the Finds Liaison Officer, particularly, if they come under the criteria to be recorded. So you've got to have all of that in place. So when I finally accomplished that side of it, and I got my first permission to go to Elvet, on the very first dive I was there, the riverbed there was totally different. It was really dense, sandstone bedrock. It was everywhere, but it had gullies, and on occasions you couldn't see the bedrock because of sand. There was a fine layer of sand. But on that very first dive, I came across a penny just standing upright. So it was encrusted in the riverbed, but I recognized instantly as being a hammered silver penny. And I was like, oh my God, how fantastic is that? And when I eventually relieved it from its place where it had been for 800 years, it turns out, 500 years, it was a Henry VIII hammered silver penny. Wow. So that was a wow. From finding... from finding the Dutch East India one droit at one bridge, and a couple of weeks later, you're straight into the sort of Tudor period coinage. It's like, wow. And that was it. For me, I never went back to Prebends Bridge. We'd searched that to death for 2 years. I'd discovered this new bridge at Elvet, had permissions to do it. And when conditions were right and good, it hadn't been raining, and visibility was okay, and it wasn't freezing cold, I would go back. Trevor at that time, he still continued to dive, but he'd had a serious parachute accident while in the army, and he ended up becoming medically discharged. So diving wasn't an easy thing for him at the time, although he's back into it now, fortunately. But so I ended up persevering by myself. And this is sort of in the period of about 2009-10, and the objects that I started to find at Elvet Bridge were clearly much, much older than what we'd found at Prebends Bridge. And working very closely with Frances McIntosh, the FLO, we were starting to collect. There was quite an assemblage coming together of small finds. And these were typically small metal finds. It seems that wooden objects didn't survive well at all. Eventually, we did find some leather material, but we would find bone and shells and that sort of stuff. One object that we found may or may not have been gold. It was this very yellow coloured metal. I can't even remember what it was. I would say it was a button. It might have been this gold button. So Francis said, Gary, if this is gold, we'll have to declare it as treasure, but we don't know if it is. Go down to Durham University, go into the Department of Archaeology, and ask to see Dr. Jenny Jones. She's one of the senior conservators down there. Tell her I sent you, tell her what you're doing, and ask her if she'll analyze the metal for us. So I did that. So very naively just walked into Durham University, in the Department of Archaeology in the Dawson building. There was, at that time, there was very little security. Ended up going upstairs and looking at all the different labs, and sure enough, Jenny's name came up and knocked on the door and went in, and she was really, really helpful. She was very interested, and she took me next door into another lab where there was an XRF, X-ray fluorescence machine. And she down there, and she analysed the metal, and it turns out it was a sort of a yellow brass. So it was disappointing, but Jenny sort of was quite interested in my story, and so I told her what I'd been doing, and she says, "Gary, what you found could be quite interesting. You really need to come and meet a gentleman called Chris Cable, Dr. Chris Cable. He'll be fascinated in your objects." So she facilitated that meeting for me. And about, I would say, a month later, I got an opportunity to go back down, and I took a sort of a box of these small finds and had this really good discussion with Chris. And Chris is a world-renowned conservator. He's published a whole series of books. He is the man you want to meet if you're ever going to get your head into archaeology. What he doesn't know. And I think this was 2009, but we struck up a deal. So I would loan the Department of Archaeology my small finds. Their students who were undertaking an MA, a master's in the Museum and Archaeological Artifacts module, would each be given one of my objects. And as part of their coursework, they had to research it. So they individually had to produce a 3,000-word research report on my little object. So they had at their disposal access to some quite interesting or quite fabulous scientific analysis equipment in the Department of Archaeology in the labs. So they could do all of the analysis, and I was given access, I was given a copy of their research reports. So my naive world, I was going to publish their work. That's what I thought would happen. So I think in year one, there was about 14 or 15 students so we had 14 or 15 research reports, and these were fascinating reading. You can just imagine, they'd done the metallurgical analysis. They'd been part of the course, they'd learned how to illustrate an object as well. We had these incredible high-resolution TIFF images, which were definitely reproducible in a magazine, in a book. So it was just this win-win. I was getting the stuff researched, and that went on for about 2 years, during which time I was reading these reports, I was reading everything else, and I was becoming quite knowledgeable in
learning an awful lot.
Yeah,
like free cooks.
Yeah, absolutely. So Chris sort of recognized that, and he says, "Gary, why don't you come back into the higher education system?" I already had a degree, but not in archaeology. He says, we'll get you come in as an undergrad. We'll do a bespoke one-off 1-year course, and if you hit the grades, and I thought they were quite mean, because they set me a pass mark of 75%, which was like, that was the toughest thing, given that I hadn't been to school for quite a while, getting my head back into that world. But I did that, and then I did some level 4 work as well. So I ended up being one of Chris's students who was given one of my objects to research, and I was able to choose which object I wanted to research, and it was a very small pectoral cross with equal length, flaring arms. It was a pewter cross, in a form, it's sort of a stylized St. Cuthbert of Durham cross. So it's a pilgrim badge, and I did my own research report on that, to quite a high standard, and I was encouraged to submit that research report for the Finds Research Group Jeff Egan Award. So you may have heard of Jeff Egan. If you're a London mudlark, you definitely know who Jeff is. Incredibly knowledgeable man. But I'd actually met Jeff a couple of years earlier. He came to Durham to look at the lead cloth seals that I'd found. And at that time, I'd found about I think it was 78. And Jeff had done his thesis on them. He was a renowned expert on lead cloth seals. And he was just absolutely fascinated in the high number of seals I had found in Durham, in this little one spot. And he'd asked if he could write it up. And I said, of course, it'd be an honor and be privileged to have you to research this and publish it. So, and I think that was in the September, but sadly, Jeff died in the December, just 2 months later. That's just Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. So it was a great loss to everybody. But it really inspired me. I couldn't understand how a man could tell so much from one small object. He knew exactly the type of cloth it was attached to, who would have fixed it to the cloth, when and where. It was just amazing. And I went on eventually to do my thesis on cloth seals as well. So I did my master's, and just before I was going to submit my final piece of work, my final research report, the quality of it apparently was quite high. So Chris Cable said, Gary, would you consider doing an upgrade into a Master of Philosophy, so to do an MPhil? So I was like, yes. And I was thinking of the implications because, it sounds good on paper, but I didn't get a single penny of funding off anybody to do this. I had to really, really pay my own way through it. And to do an MPhil meant I had, it was another £9,000 I had to find from my wife's bank account. That's where, so my wife Angela sort of got me through this. She really did. But eventually, after this, I think it was 6 years of doing that, predominantly part-time, because obviously I was still doing the firefighting. I graduated in the June 2017 with a Master of Philosophy in the Department of Archaeology at Durham University.
Fantastic.
And that single thing was by far the best thing I could have ever done, and it has opened up so many doors. It really, really has. So just this chance discovery, by doing the right thing all the way through, by ensuring you're methodical, you engage with many different people, and the people just say that you're genuinely passionate about something, and and I guess you're a decent guy and you try to do the right thing, and let's give them a chance. And I just seized those opportunities as they came along.
So then what happened after that then? So you were given, did Durham University create this underwater archaeology role for you? Or, you obviously left the fire service. How did that?
Yeah, so I graduated in the Department of Archaeology in 2017. I was promoted. I was given the distinguished position of being an honorary research associate in the Department of Archaeology. That meant I could then go back into the department anytime I wanted and access the labs, analyze the materials, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
The loan of small finds to the students is something that's continued since 2009-10. Just last year, I think it was 35 students produced research reports on the objects. So today I've got this huge pile of research reports. I've got this incredible wealth of fantastic material that we can publish. So my role now today really is to sort of coordinate the wider research on the Durham River Weir assemblage. That's what we've called it. I should say that throughout all of that period, I continued to dive at Elvet, and to date, I've amassed quite a large number of small finds. I've got 13,495 small finds.
I know it's over quite a long period of time, but that many objects at one bridge is just mind-boggling.
Did you have to do what we did and sift through all that man-made rubbish to get to it, or was it relatively clear?
It was relatively clear. I think typically twice a year we get these huge floods in the northeast where the river levels jump up 2 or 3 meters, and there's just this torrent of water. Seems to sweep away a lot of the big debris, the shopping trolleys and trees and everything else, scaffold and poles. But it's the nature of the riverbed at Elvet, which is unusual. So I mentioned before this solid sandstone bedrock, and if you turn the clock back 200 years, the river depth at Elvet was much, much shallower. It would have been perhaps only knee deep in section across. It's only 2 or 3 meters deep today because of a weir that's half a mile downstream. So the Fulling Mill weir is artificially, yeah, absolutely, right up back beyond the bridge. But for the 600 years of its history, from the time Elvet Bridge was built, fast flowing water ran underneath the arches, and it was relatively shallow, fast flowing. But today it's 2 or 3 meters deep. The flow has greatly reduced. Honestly, it is so slow. It takes forever for the silt to just drift downstream. So you're forever fanning away just to clear it up. So the bedrock has acted as a trap. So over millennia, over tens of thousands of years, the faster flowing river has carved channels out of the bedrock. And you'll see similar things, almost a bit like rock pools, but created by faster flowing water. And these channels have acted as traps. So as the object has fell into the river, predominantly from the bridge, they've hit the riverbed and they've just vibrated along and then fell into a gully and pretty much been trapped there. So as the depth of the river has increased, the flow reduces and the sediments fall into these gullies and compacted in. And any other heavier objects get stuck in there as well. So it doesn't matter how fast the seasonal floods are, how powerful they are, the objects trapped in these gullies are pretty much safe. And it's just pure luck that is what happens at Durham. And I've just come along and stumbled upon this. So I don't necessarily have to dig through the modern detritus. I've started at the bottom of a gully and just methodically worked my way up over an 8 to 9 year period now.
I was going to say, because it sounds like you make it sound easy. I've just dropped in a river. I found this. I found that. I found 13. I'm sure it's not that easy, is it? I mean, there's lots of things to consider, and some of these objects must have taken a long time to dig out and find. You didn't just sort of swim along and go, "Oh, look, there's a coin there. I'm going to pick that up."
Yeah, no, it was trial and error. It really was, and I always hark back to that time on the Eugenia Chandris wreck, where I saw a man a diver digging for pom-pom shells. And I sort of knew if I was going to find something old at Durham, I had to sort of dig. And by literally digging down through these layers of, sort of quite large house brick size, roof tiles, roof slates, sized objects. But as you get down through the layers, they become slightly smaller but more compact. And then eventually you come to bedrock, solid. So nothing can go below the bedrock, but I've got about a meter of loose sand and pebbles and cobbles and stone and detritus all crammed in there. But just above the bedrock, there's this dark earth layer. It's almost like a coal seam, and it's visible. You can see it. And this dark earth layer is full of sort of organic material. It's this anaerobic layer where there's virtually no oxygen and everything is preserved. So the objects I found at Elvet are typically really, really well preserved. There's virtually no oxidizations taking place. The vast majority of objects are copper alloy or lead, but iron does survive. Obviously, when you bring it up, it starts to oxidize, and you have to preserve it and conserve it very quickly. And that's where I am. So it's almost like an open cast mine. So I'm taking a layer off the top, just going down and down and down. Eventually I'll hit bedrock, but just 6 inches above the bedrock is this dark earth layer crammed full of small metal finds. And on any given dive, I will find between 50 and 150 small finds.
And you must be digging for a long time. Some of the rivers that we've been in recently, apart from obviously the shopping trolleys and the bed frame, there is a layer, isn't there, Craig? There's a layer of sort of something, but how deep do you actually go, and how long do you go for? Do you know what I mean? I'm sure there's stuff down there because it's a medieval bridge, and like you say, the offerings from people throwing in off that bridge, there must be stuff there. But how deep and how long do you go for?
Yeah, obviously every bridge will have its own peculiar riverbed. a riverbed peculiar to that geographical area of where it is. And I guess if you dug deep enough, you would come across some form of bedrock.
Predominantly peat is the base, and as soon as you touch it, you black out everything around you, and the peat layers are quite thick. It's what the Norfolk Broads are known for. Norfolk Broads are man-made, and it was peat diggings in the 14th and 15th century that created the Broads, and so predominantly the rivers up here are peat beds.
So what are the piers resting on? The bridge piers, the bridge supports, do they eventually go down to bedrock?
Must do. Yeah.
So you will. I remember filming an episode of River Hunters, and we were at Tewkesbury, and it was a sort of a tributary. We came across this really, really thick clay, and it was actually boulder clay from the glacier period, and man had never been beneath that, and objects didn't sink into it. It was so compact. So at that point, you realise, well, actually, there's nothing there. This is an area that's swept clean with flood water. Any layers of peat or sediment or gravel, they've gone. Where the objects should have been, they've gone. They've gone, been swept down. And maybe that's what you're coming across with the peat. You've come down to a layer where man never was. Objects were never there. It's almost the natural. It's been undisturbed by man, and in that case, probably move on to somewhere else.
Yeah,
and I think one of the big problems is that Jim and I experience is that the amount of human rubbish in the shopping trolleys and the stuff you describe with the scaffold poles and that sort of thing, bicycles, is so thick and so much that the original reason we went there immediately just turned into a river clear up, because we're determined to go back, but we still got to do another river clear up before we can even think of going on to the next step, because we've got to get the rubbish out of the way.
Yeah, you've got to move, just persevere, keep removing that modern area, but do a sort of a trial trench, so you don't have to clear the entire riverbed. If you're maybe in the central gully where the flow is slightly better, so the sediments get swept away clear, and that's going to aid your visibility, just persevere there and just measure out a trench. It'll be trial and error. So if you set yourself, right, I want to dig a trench that's 0.5 meter wide by 2 meters long, and as you're digging down through that, you will see the different layers. You'll see them change. And it may be that you come to the natural undisturbed stuff and you say, well, that's it. It's pointless going any deeper than that because there's no objects there. Man has never disturbed this area. But above that is where you should find something. So if you move the modern rubbish out, set a picture in your mind that I need to dig a trench that 0.5 meter wide, maybe as much as 1 meter deeper, and just keep digging.
That's interesting, because that's you're doing under the surface. You're doing the same as you would on the surface. You are marking out a trench and digging a trench and just sticking with that one area. I don't know why I wouldn't think that, but it makes sense, doesn't it?
We've just finished filming season 2 of River Hunters. I think it was early September when we finished. So we had this incredible summer where we travelled the length and breadth of England. And I can't tell you the locations of where we filmed. I'll mention the counties. I think that if you Google River Hunters season 2, there's some early press releases out there, and it mentions some of the rivers that we are. But we did 2 episodes in the Highlands of Scotland, right the way up past Fort William. That was just incredible. We did 2 episodes in Yorkshire. We did one in Sussex and another one in Kent. And the Kent one was the last episode that we filmed. Without giving away too many clues, it was in a medieval city in Kent, and there's a couple of rivers run through the middle of it. We were told, because of the historic nature of the site, that we weren't allowed to dig holes at all. We were looking for late medieval objects at that particular site. So our brief was, don't go down more than a couple of inches. So I was devastated because I wanted to dig, but like I do at Durham, but I knew I couldn't do this. So you just persevere. And in the last 15 minutes of filming for the entire season, Rick and Beau had gone off to do sort of like a summary shot. And I took one of the safety crew and I said, I'm going to go back down to the bridge, the first place we searched yesterday. And for the last 15 minutes, I'm just going to have a go. And so I was down on my knees. I wasn't using a metal detector or pointer or anything. I was literally kneeling down with my mask and snorkel on. I was just wafting the layers, the loose sand off the top, and I was literally going down no more than two inches, and out pops this lovely little object, which was 16th century. And I can't tell you what it is when you see it.
That's not fair. You've just teased us now.
Yeah, that sounds really exciting. Let me ask you a question. You're in an area that was very heavily bombed in the Second World War. Anywhere in Kent coming up through London, ordnance was dropped. When you're on your knees with your mask your face that close with your mask and snorkel, and you're wafting away with no visibility, are you not the slightest bit concerned about unexploded ordnance you might come across?
He's not thought about it, now he has.
No, I have. The visibility, to be honest, is incredible. I think it's these limestone riverbeds are just so clear.
So you see fins or whatever there was.
Yeah. For me, just putting your head under the water and you're about 2 foot deep and you're just wafting away, you will find things just eyes only, without a shadow of doubt. Just a wetsuit on. You don't need to scuba gear all the time. And it's great fun. You're just wafting away and you find stuff.
You mentioned river hunters a couple of times, and obviously how did you get into that? Because I loved it. When I first saw it, I came across it quite by accident. I think it was on the History Channel or Sky History, and
yeah.
Oh, river hunters. Oh, I like the sound of this, and I was hooked on it. And I watched every single episode back to back, and it's like, damn, there's only one series.
Yeah.
There isn't any more. Obviously, there's a second series. But how did they approach you? Is it because you are literally the only underwater archaeologist?
It seems that way. Yes, I've actually been involved with the show over a year before it actually started filming. I was approached. The TV production company called Hello Halo. Strangely, they were one of 6 different TV companies who searched the internet. They had a similar idea to search rivers in England and Europe, a bit like Time Team Underwater. That's the way it was sold to us. So 6 different companies. There was a company from Canada even contacted me just purely because of my internet Twitter account or Instagram profile, and asked me would I be interested. And I met with several different companies who we had Skype meetings and all sorts. They came to hear some of my lectures that I gave.
Were you a bit dubious to start with? People contact me from a TV company, well, we want you to search some rivers.
No, I'd done some local TV work with the BBC and ITV, and I'd started to get some of my books, some of my articles were getting published. So I was quite confident. I knew what I was talking about, and I was actually quite good at finding things. So I guess I was probably one of the best people to reach out to. But one by one, these companies just faded away. They're almost rude in that they never ever get back to you. It just dies a death. But Hello Halo, the TV production company responsible for river hunters, persevered, and their concept was quite straightforward. Go around a series of rivers, just jump in and have a look what we find. And they were as naive as anybody, I guess. It was just this wonderful idea that they had. So I worked with them behind the scenes to sort of just develop the concept, I guess. And then the production team came down to Durham, and they'd been asking me which site, where could we search in the UK. And being based in the Northeast, I'd years earlier had an opportunity to go to Corbridge in Northumberland, where the River Tyne runs through. It's a major Roman site. And I was aware of this Roman bridge, and I'd actually snorkeled it a few years earlier. And I remember seeing the piers of the bridge still in place, and Samian ware just scattered on the riverbed. And I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. So I suggested that as a really good location. 2 of the production team came down and rendezvoused with me at Corbridge. So it was the first time I'd actually met them face to face, and they're really interested. I took my granddaughter, Evie, she came along for the day. And took them up to the site and showed them where the Roman bridge crossed. I was just explaining. She says, so what? Julie, she says, why is this spot so important, Gary? And I thought, well, this is on the course of the Roman road. which is Dea Street. So you can just imagine 1500, 1600 years ago, Roman legions marching along this spot here, approaching the bridge. There's a big Roman fort just at the other side, Corbridge Roman fort. But 2 miles north of that is Hadrian's Wall. So you can just imagine this tens of thousands of Roman soldiers, legionnaires from all over Europe would across the bridge at this spot. And she says, you know what, Gary, would you do that again? But this time, can we just video you doing that? And I was like, what for? She says, well, I don't want to miss anything. So unbeknown to me, so I was being set up, I guess.
Here's your screen test.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. So I just ran through it again. She said, just put a bit of enthusiasm in and just say exactly what you just said. So I did it again. But I'm not even a Roman specialist. It's not my thing. I'm vaguely aware of the Romans, you know. And so I did it. And they went back to company HQ and said, look at this guy here. He's qualified. He's got the kit. He knows it. Apparently he looks good on TV. All of that. And a couple of days later, I got a phone call. Gary, would you be our underwater archaeologist for the show? Yeah. So they always were going to come to Durham. So the episode filmed in Durham where me and Beau go diving on the spot, that was always going to happen. But it turned. So I was going to be the show's underwater archaeologist on all 8 episodes. But unfortunately, we had a family holiday. It was pre-booked, and I couldn't give up that. So I missed out on 3 episodes. I was devastated.
I bet. I found it absolutely amazing. Like I say, it must have been nice to go to have an episode in Durham. But I think one of the ones I liked was the River Trent. I think it's episode 4 with the Vikings in the River Trent.
At Tamworth.
Yeah. I mean, it's just incredible, isn't it?
Yeah. And Repton School. Yes.
How difficult is it to find out the landowners and who you need to go to get that permission to be in the water in that particular spot? Where do you start? Yeah,
that's a good question. There's obviously local knowledge is probably the first thing you can. So farmers, they all seem. You get a lot of tenant farmers across the UK as well, and they rent the land off, for example, local councils. So they could probably tell you who the landowner is. Just make some tentative inquiries, and then you can literally go and approach them and say, could we do a deal? Could we have some sort of license agreement whereby I'm allowed to go? And you really need to get that in writing, without a shadow of doubt, because the day you go in and you find something pretty special, and if you haven't got that, it's just going to give you a world of pain. It really, really is.
So the second part of that question then is the fines liaison officers. How many are there in the UK? How do you contact the fines liaison officer?
Yeah, there's pretty much every county in England. I'm not sure about Wales. I think the Welsh ones might have one. But every county in England has its own fines liaison officer,
right?
Or should do. On occasions, FLOs cover 2 counties, but typically it's 1 per county. You've just got to Google Portable Antiquity Scheme. They've got an entire list, so you could obviously know where you live. You'll find it's relatively straightforward process to find out who your own local fines liaison officer is. And these guys are consummate professionals. They are really well trained in small fines identification. They know the law. They know everything you should do. And there's some incredible guides available on the Portable Antiquity Scheme website, and fines recording, fines IDs, got whole typologies of coins and buttons and buckles. All of the stuff's on there, and it is the responsible thing to do. So, develop a rapport with the FLO. Obviously, with the restrictions of the current pandemic in place at the moment, a lot of them are working from home. They aren't really reaching out into the metal detecting communities. They're not meeting up, or very rarely are they meeting up with people to do a handover. So there's a lot of online dialogue taking place at the moment. But slowly, I think more workshops, more fines recording days will open up again. Obviously, if you find something, you really, really need to GPS it or work out exactly where its location is. That's critically important. If it's something underwater that is clearly stunning, of historical importance, and a precious metal, you got a bit of a dilemma, because you don't want to leave it there in case it gets swept away or you lose it. If you discovered a sort of a hoard on land, you'd be advised to leave it in situ, contact the FLO, and they will come and dig it out and do a proper archaeological excavation of the objects, record it in context. That's really important.
They can't really do that underwater, though, can they?
That's right. Yes, that is difficult. And but I mean, if you found sort of a pretty special sword or a dagger in a river, which is very possible, there's thousands of them in there, it's going to be loose. So if you've disturbed the soil, you've exposed it, it's a bit of a dilemma, but you're going to have to at one point lift it out of that water. The conservation thing is really important.
Potential issue there for damaging it, though, while you're trying to remove it, not just under the surface, but as soon as you get to, how would you not? Christ, I'd love to find something like that. I can't imagine finding anything like that, but how would you preserve it so quickly?
Well, that's the difficult thing, isn't it? If you imagine it is a sword, it will have ironwork on there. The blade will be iron. So if you, by virtue of lifting out the water, you will damage it. There'll be a bit of that iron left in the water. I guess the advice would be to cover it up, photograph it, leave it in situ if you can, and get your finds liaison officer out there.
Yeah.
But that whole process would be this torturous, long-winded process. Getting the photographs developed, emailing them to the FLO, or making a phone call if you knew them, and saying, look, this is clearly an important dagger, but it's in the middle of a river, 2 meters down, and the FLO isn't going to go scuba diving, very unlikely. So you potentially, you're in this position where, if you just think about this practically, if you are underwater with your scuba gear on and you discover something that's clearly precious or even historical, 400 or 500 years old, you've got to imagine that it's loose and you can retrieve it quite safely from the water. But the second it hits the oxygen, any ironwork's going to start to corrode. There is guides on the Portable Antiquity Scheme about conservation as well, what to do with ironwork. Basically, you've got to, I don't really want to go on record and say what to do with ironwork. I mean, iron rusts straight away, doesn't it? And to be honest, I don't actually know what you would do with it.
No.
It's such a difficult thing. You could keep it in a plastic bag full of water. And we're talking here about fresh water as well. It's a different kettle of fish if it's in a sort of an estuary where salt water.
Yeah.
Brackish.
Yeah. I was on an interesting lecture just the other last week about the Mary Rose and the horrendous efforts they've had to go to just conserve the woodwork and obviously the small finds. It's a great expense. Conservation is an expensive game.
Yeah.
But the vast majority of finds that will come out will be objects like coins, like buttons and buckles, copper alloy or pewter objects that actually are really easy to stabilize. You just got to dry them off, try not to clean them, don't do any abrasive cleaning. There's 1,010 guides on YouTube and different forums of how to clean silver coins, but don't. The virtue of cleaning coins damages them. It just takes this little layer off the top and that just destroys some of the detail. But the guides are out there. But I've got, well, certainly in my example, 2/3 of everything I found are dress accessories. So the buttons, the buckles, the brooches, and the pins, copper alloy or brass, and they preserve really, really well.
Where do you suggest we look for these? Is it under bridges, like the medieval bridge that we looked at, and we've found a couple of other potential locations? Is that right under the bridge, or is it 100 yards away from the bridge if it's fast flowing water? I guess everywhere's different, but what, as a rule of thumb, where is the best place to look?
Yeah, I would definitely say downstream from every bridges, not underneath them, because whoever's built the bridge or repaired the bridge would have disturbed the riverbed directly beneath it. But think about how the objects might have been lost in the first place. And it really is a percentage game as well. So if you are lucky enough to have access to a sort of a town centre bridge, it's a nice big wide river, and tens of thousands of people cross that bridge on a weekly basis, the objects that you find off that bridge will be a sort of a stone's throw downstream, because people who are making those wishes, those votive offerings to throw a coin, they just throw them over. You can almost calculate the trajectory where they would have hit the river. Yeah, where it would have landed. The second it hit the water, it would have almost dropped vertical to the riverbed. But once it's on the riverbed, it's the nature of the riverbed. So if it is sort of a sand shingle type riverbed, the objects themselves will just vibrate along, and the force of the water would sweep them along. But slowly and surely, if they're metal objects, they'll sort of sink through the sand and still continue to move downstream, but not really a great distance. So my advice is the center of the bridge, about a stone's throw downstream, and anything up to. So I wouldn't go. I would start 5 meters downstream from the bridge and then progress down to 25, 30, 40 meters downstream. That's sort of central channel. And that's probably where you get the greatest flow of river as well. That can be helpful because it'll sweep away the silt as you're disturbing it. You'll realize very quickly if you dive to the edges of the river, the flow is massively lower.
Yeah.
Conditions silt up much quicker. And you need that central.
Yeah, well, I think this one where we went, so the bridge, there's a little weir that goes over, and then there's a big, deeper bit. It's about 3 meters deep. And then it sort of shallows up again, and it's almost knee deep, just 20 meters downstream. It's almost knee deep. Stuff wouldn't go up there. That would surely stay in the deeper gully, I guess.
In the gully, yeah.
Anyone that's seen the TV programs are just, it's quite obvious that you're so passionate about everything that you find still, and you've found tens of thousands of items, yet you still find something and get that excitement that enthralls everyone, the whole audience, especially Jim and I, just love it. There must be something that is your favorite. What have you found that you've gone, that was for me? Is it that first trowel because it started the journey, or is it something since?
I get asked that question quite a lot, and you're right. Every time you find something that's old, you still get that buzz. It's just, wow, fantastic. And you just realize you were the last person to touch that from the time it was lost 400, 500, 600, 700 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's quite, I wouldn't say emotional, but it's like, wow, it really hits you.
Yeah.
You don't take it for granted. Anything with somebody's name on, superb, because it gives you a chance to go back and look through the records, the archives, to try to identify who that person is. And that object that I found on the last episode of River Hunters, we do that. The one I can't tell you. I should say that season 2 of River Hunters is another level better than season 1. The camaraderie, the banter, the fun that we have, and the things that we find are just absolutely incredible.
Just out of interest, when does that come out? Because I can't wait.
It's still in the edit now, and we had hoped it would be back into January, but I think it's going to be more moved back to the spring.
No.
But it's prime time TV. I think it's going to be on a Monday night at 9 o'clock. Peak viewing. Probably the best thing I found, and it was just last year. It was a pilgrim cross. It was a silver pilgrim cross with equal length flaring arms. It has open work in the middle. It's incredibly rare. It's decorated. Because it's silver, it's treasure. It's been researched by one of the students at the Department of Archaeology, and it's one of a kind. There's no other record of it anywhere. But given that it was found 314 meters away from the shrine of St. Cuthbert, and it's not too dissimilar from St. Cuthbert of Durham's Anglo-Saxon golden cloisonné cross. It is incredibly rare and significantly important. So that was just a very recent discovery. I've just gone through. I worked with our finds liaison officer Ben Westwood, and we've just declared it as treasure through the scheme. The record's been added to the Antiquity Scheme website, but I don't know if it's publicly available, but it will be very, very soon. But it is museum quality already. I should say, and this is quite important actually, the 13,500 objects that I found, I gifted them all to the citizens of Durham. So I'm not in this as a treasure hunter. I'm not in this to make money. The very fact that, I've gone to university, got a degree and an MPhil, it's opened up so many doors, is more than enough reward for me.
Fantastic.
I think that's what we've said all along, is we're not interested in finding something valuable. If it is valuable, it's great, but that will go to the right place where it's supposed to go. But just to find something, a bit like you I've seen you get so excited about a little buckle that's 400 years old. That would be an awesome thing to find.
Yeah.
And it's not valuable, or a coin that isn't valuable, but has got some history to it. That for us is the most important thing, not the value of, we're not doing it to make money it's to say, look, exactly what you said. I'm the first person to touch this in maybe 500-600 years.
Hundreds of years, yeah.
Yeah. We've got this vision to produce 3 monographs, 3 big volumes on the Durham River Weir assemblage. And for me, that is absolutely amazing. If we can publish that, I'll go somewhere towards rewriting Durham's history, because nowhere in our history books do these objects ever appear.
What a legacy to leave behind you, Gary. What a legacy.
Yeah.
There's not many firefighters can say that as well.
So are you still pulling objects out now then?
Yeah, with the season 8 was supposed to start in May in the river, but that coincided with lockdown. So we just literally never got a chance to dive in the river this season. I would have done towards the end of the season with after River Hunters was we did the shooting for that. At the back end of last year, I've linked up with a community archaeology group at Sunderland to search an area of the River Weir, actually further down towards Hilton, where we think we've discovered this Roman bridge stroke dam structure. And we've pulled out some incredible stone anchors, Roman stone anchors from the riverbed there, which is fantastic. So I'm very conscious that I think I found enough at Elvet. 13,500 is enough to write up. And
I think so.
Yeah.
And I've got plenty of other options.
Safety comes first, obviously. So you must have a safety team with you, I guess.
What, for river hunters or for just that?
Oh, no, for just your general archaeology, or you just
me
on your own?
Yeah, one-man band. Yeah.
Wow.
to be honest, it's this, without a shadow of doubt, it's the safest diving I've ever done.
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier the scrapes that we got in on shipwrecks around the UK, but diving in rivers, if you avoid the river traffic, and the sharps and the needles, not that you get many sharps, but you do cut your hands multiple times. Avoid the river traffic. Avoid the winter months when you might get a free flow or hypothermia. Cherry pick when you're going to go, when the visibility is good. Hygiene is important, because Wheels disease is a real constant menace. So wash your hands. As soon as you get out, wash your hands, wash your face, and before you eat or drink. Obviously, if you run out of air, in my case, I just stand up.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to get nitrogen narcosis or the bends, because it's 2-3 meters deep. And if you can avoid that river traffic, those big rowing boats, you'll be well. So I live on the outskirts of the city. From leaving my house, I can be fully kitted up and underwater in less than 16 minutes. Then I'll spend 2 hours underwater, my 15-litre cylinder, and I'll come out with obviously all of those objects, and I've got to sort of straighten me back when I get out. It's just like it is backbreaking.
Gary, why don't you go for a side mount or twin set, and then you can stay down for 4 hours?
I could do, but I wouldn't be married.
Yeah, you've heard of golf widows, Jim. This would be more.
Yeah, Angela's put up with a lot in these recent years with the diving, and that would be the straw, I think.
So you have a safety team with River Hunters, because obviously it's media, so you've got to have that safety team, and for HSE, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a brilliant team behind the scenes. And you never see it on camera, but they are there, and they're always telling me off, and yeah, but they're great fun. They're excited. They're straight across. What have you found? What have you found? And I met up with one of the guys. The safety team that we've used for both seasons come from Northumberland, and they all specialise in adventure training, and they're a lovely bunch of lads. And I met up with one just a couple of weeks ago. He came to Durham with his wife for a tour, and I had for a coffee and whatnot. And he sort of airdropped us loads of photographs that he took. He's in the water being safety, and me, Beau and Rick are being filmed, and they're just so excited, taking loads of photographs and videos.
If you like history and archaeology, and like you say, growing up with Time Team and stuff like that, and scuba diving, it's really hard not to get excited about.
Yeah, it really is. And I think the enthusiasm really rubs off. The banter is just great. And to be honest, when I found out Rick and Beau were going to be the two key presenters, I was a little bit disappointed. This American dude who uses the word cool lots and wow.
Awesome.
Yeah. But to his credit, Beau is a machine when it comes to finding objects. Yeah. We're working side by side, and he will find 10 objects to my 2. He's just a boom. He doesn't know what they are when they come out.
Doesn't matter, does it?
He's a character.
Hey, Gary, is this old? And I was going, yeah, that's old. And Rick is a sort of a consummate professional. He's so into it. He loves it. And he's like a little kid when he finds something. We on the site at Sussex that we dived, that we filmed just was this in August, and he'd been in the water 15 minutes. So them typically we'll arrive at a site, them two talk about it. They pull up in the Jeep. Oh yeah, we're going to dive here because there's a castle there, and the Romans were here, and whatever. So they have this cunning plan. They end up in the river, and normally they struggle to find anything, so they call Gary in, and I arrive in my slow-mo shot, to save the day. But in this episode in Sussex, within 15 minutes, he found the star find of the show. It's like, and he was like, "That's it. I'm not doing anything else. I've done it." And he was so made up. He was so happy that he found this really wonderful artifact.
In the first series, he didn't really find a lot, did Rick? Did he?
He didn't, but he did find a couple of things, and bless him. I mean, I'd never used a metal detector. I very rarely used one. I was given an underwater metal detector just if I would do a write up, and that was good. But I couldn't use it at Elvet Bridge because you're not allowed to. Stood in the garage for 7 or 8 years. But on River Hunters, we use detectors all the time and probes. We don't need to, but it really, really helps the show finding objects. And so Rick, because he's a big, tall fella as well, and he's a bit gangly walking through the rivers, but he gets down there, and this season in particular, he finds some absolutely wonderful objects. And I wouldn't say we're jealous one of the other guys has found something, but there is a lot of competition, and the pressure's on.
My coin is older than your coin.
Yeah, that happens all the time. We were up in Scotland, and me and Rick are side by side. Beau's gone off and wandered further down the river with a camera, and he finds something which is fantastic. And but me and Beau, me and Rick both get a really good signal. So we drop down our knees and we're digging, and he gets his out. God, Gary, look at this! And he comes across. What do you think? Oh yeah, that's exactly what we knew. We know what it is, and we had a good bit of banter and how it was used. And it was like a wonderful story associated with it. And then lo and behold, as I dig, he says, "So let's see yours." So as I dig mine out, mine comes out. It's identical to Rick's, but it's bigger. And he's like, ah.
But you can imagine that we'd be like that. We would be like that. It'd be like, mine's bigger, mine's older, mine's shinier.
What I found, yeah, that's fantastic. But look at this.
So when is series 3? Are you coming to Norfolk, and do you need some buddies?
Yes, I tell you what. If you find us, because I know I mean, Norwich in itself has such wonderful history. It really does, and it was on the short list. There's a little section. I forget the name of the river, 200 or 300 meters away from the cathedral, and there's this. I can't remember. It's got this strange tower building. That's
Cow Tower.
That's it. Yes, and then just below that, there's a medieval ford.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, so that stretch of the river made it onto the shortlist for this season.
Really? Well, that's what on our short list. We haven't even we've got a long list and a short list, but that bridge near Cow Tower, there's a pub, the Adam and Eve pub, which is not far from there. I think it's either the oldest or the oldest and smallest pub in the UK.
Right.
And it's related to this Cow Tower and this Bishop's Bridge, and so yeah, that's really old. That is.
Well, I think certainly season 1 of River Hunt is the viewing figures, the positive comments are really, really high, and there was a bit of delay of filming season 2 because of it's a long story, but I think Disney bought out History Channel and some others, and we had to be sure that Disney were happy with the concept that we were filming, and clearly they were. But there's a belief that this could become Sky History's time team, which ran for 20 odd years. I don't think I'll be on the show when I'm an ancient diver, but you never know. But certainly, if I'm pretty confident, because I know how fantastic season 2 is going to come across, and based on the
Stop talking about it, Gary, will you? Honestly, stop it.
Before we started, just before you joined us, Gary, Jim and I were chatting, and we were having a bit of a joke, but we were saying that it's a little bit of a shame that you went down the BZAC route, not the PADI route. And if you become a PADI instructor, this could have been a great speciality course in the scuba archaeology for river hunting. It would have been brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a couple of students have asked, could I teach them doing it? But I have took a couple of students in the river at Durham, but they get so cold that you have to bail out after half an hour.
Yeah.
Well, I'm available to be a student, Gary. I'm sure Craig is, if you need any.
If there's ever an opportunity, that's the best PPE you could ever wear is us in scuba gear. So if there's an opportunity to come and join you anywhere, we'd love the opportunity to learn.
But guys, you get yourselves up Durham next May onwards, May, June, July, and I'll take you in.
We'll be there.
It really is a percentage game. If you can access a particular site in a river that has predominantly a bridge, or it's a built environment, tenements and old houses on the adjacent banks, the more likely people would frequent that area. So if you're talking about tens of thousands of people over its history, or even maybe millions, then the likelihood of objects being accidentally or deliberately lost just goes up. So that's where you need to be. Medieval crossing points that are being used, pilgrim routes, Roman bridges, Roman roads.
And here in East Anglia is Viking territory as well.
Obviously, we were looking for the Vikings at Torksay and Tamworth and on the Trent. So Viking gaming pieces are very common finds. Yeah.
What about a nice Viking sword or weapon of some sort? That'd be quite amazing.
Definitely, but incredibly rare.
Yeah.
You know what? They are there. They're just under the water there. And Roman objects, 2,000 years old, are probably the most common objects in the rivers. They're everywhere, literally thousands. If you just got to look at the Pierce Bridge hoard, have you heard of that? So the River Tees, which is pretty actually on the border of County Durham and I'll say Cleveland, but it's North Yorkshire actually. Do apologise. So you got the River Tees running through there. There's a Roman fort on the north bank called it's Pierce Bridge. That is the modern day village. And the River Dea Street, the Roman road, crossed the river at that point. And there's foundations of 3 or 4 different Roman bridges being discovered subsequently. But 2 divers, Rob and Ralph, actually the snorkelers, because it's only knee deep. Everyone calls them divers, but they're really the snorkelers. They've been excavating at that site for the last 25 years, and they've recovered over 3,500 Roman artifacts from that spot. It's just recently been declared treasure by the British Museum. The assemblage itself has been acquired by the Museum of Archaeology in Durham. So it's going to become a major exhibition next year. The objects themselves have been researched by University of Reading, and these are seriously important Roman objects that have come out. It's incredibly, the level of preservation is superb. And what they think is at the spot where the Roman bridges crossed the river, probably where the central spot is, there would have been a sort of a supporting pier, but there might have been a small island where there would have been some little altars or some little gods just positioned on there. So if you can imagine, you're a Roman soldier, part of a legion, marching north to fight somebody, and you were crossing a major river, you would want to make a little wish, a little votive offering to your god. So these little statuettes, these rings, these bracelets, an incredibly broad range of artifact types, have been left as little votive offerings on this little island in the middle of the River Tees. And as the seasonal floodwaters come through, they just sweep these objects off the island into the water. And that's where they are. They've come out in their thousands there.
Wow.
And you've got to imagine that every major English river where a significant Roman bridge would have been, you will have similar deposits of objects in their thousands.
So I guess that's the research that you need to do, isn't it? Craig was on about it earlier before you came on, was to go to the local library and research these old maps of where some of these old fords may have been that had the crossings.
Yeah. Old fords and pilgrim ways, pilgrim footpaths, old roads. You just got to look at sort of Google Maps and just zoom in an area that you think is of interest, and then just zoom out, and you see the straight roads, which are still used to this day, traveling for miles leading up to that crossing point.
Yeah, the Roman roads, because they built them straight.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I mean, it's been absolutely fascinating, Gary. I mean, there's. I just wish we could get in the water and go and find something right now. I really do.
Yeah, captivating and enthralling. Just to listen to the story and how it all came about is fantastic.
And I can't wait for season 2 of River. I really can't wait for it.
Yeah.
And me too. I'm quite excited by this one, and I'm pretty sure we'll get seasons 3, 4, and 5 commissioned soon as well. Just if any of your listeners are interested, many of the objects that I've found are available to view on our website, into the Dive Into Durham .uk website, and there's a lot of information on there about what our aims and objectives are and the types of objects. So it's quite informative. So do check out that, guys.
So that was diveintodurham.co.uk.
Just UK. Diveintodurham.uk.
UK. Okay. Well, just captivating, enthralling, as I said just a minute ago. Thank you so much, Gary, for joining us. That was so interesting and inspiring as well. Jim and I, as Jim just said, can't wait to go and get wet again.
Good stuff. And I really look forward to meeting you two in person in the river in Durham next June, May-June time.
The problem is, now you've invited us, we're coming.
Well, fully expect you to do.
Excellent. Thank you, Gary. Thank you so much. And we'll keep in touch, definitely.
You're more than welcome, gents. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.